Silver Society.
Welcome to the Silver Eye Society. We're here with our monthly AMA for July. We've got two great questions we're going to be answering in this public portion of the AMA. How to school your children with the rise of indoctrination in public schools, and what's your opinion on longevity science that tries to extend human lifespan? So we're going to answer these two questions to our best ability to convey insight and brilliance to you, dear listeners, so that you may improve your life, extend your lifespan, school your children, etc. But if you really want to get serious, you will join us in the second half of this AMA, the patron-only portion. In that AMA, we'll be answering the questions, can you describe the worst scene that you've ever seen in a movie? And if Congress passed a law respecting an establishment of religion, should we honor that law? We've got a lot of philosophical, artistic questions in the private portion of the AMA. So let's start. How to school your children with the rise of indoctrination in public schools. You want to give the advice that you usually give for these kind of questions?
Most of my advice about schooling is to take your children into the wilderness and make them go through basically wilderness training, and have a education of nature, but that may not work for most people. So I guess, look, the basic answer is, whatever it is you believe, tell your kids when they go to school to stop believing whatever it is that they're saying that you don't like. That's probably the best way to do it, right? Or pull your kids out of school and try to homeschool them if you can, but you probably can't.
I don't know, man. You might as well do the homeschooling, because at this point, the public schools, I think your kid's going to learn more and be more well-rounded with a homeschool education than they are with a public school education. Because these kids cannot fucking read, okay? They're like in 8th grade and they're reading at like a 3rd grade level, and I'm not exaggerating. My mom is a teacher in public schools. This is what she sees. So I don't think you should have any fear that if you homeschool your kid, they're somehow not going to be as educated as the kids in school that are reading decades below their age level. So that may not be a concern anymore, because public school education may have dropped so far in quality that you're actually just fine giving your kid a homeschool education. But the question with that is, like,
but a lot of people can't.
Time?
That's what I mean. A lot of people can't stay at home with their kid and teach them.
Start a commune, okay? Create a village where you will have like people that take turns, taking all the kids together and teaching them values that are not insane, whatever they're teaching in public schools. You can also get involved at the public school and let it be known that you're, aware. You're paying attention. Sometimes that's enough to spur on a little bit of accountability in a school. But I know that there's a lot of not fear per se, but discomfort with knowing that I don't know how many of them there are, but there is this growing number of individuals that believe that their life's calling is to force other people to be the way they want them to be. And sometimes they call themselves activists, and they take on these charges in inappropriate places, like your kid's school. That's not the place to be an activist. You don't get to do activism on other people's kids. So I understand that people are really uncomfortable with the possibility of sending your child to school so that they learn pragmatic knowledge and having them come home with ideological information that actually just confuses them. And in many cases, it is purposely designed to drive a rift between you and your children. That's how cult dynamics work. That's how political cults work. They create a division between the family and the children so that the children become theirs, essentially. So I get the fear about it. Personally, I don't have kids, so it's a question that's in the back of my mind as something that I definitely will need to deal with eventually, but that I don't necessarily need to deal with right now. Though I think there's a middle ground, right? Which is, if you really create
wilderness.
No, that's not the middle ground. If you create a healthy relationship with your kid where your child feels comfortable to come home and say, here's what I learned today. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, let me see your homework. Like, oh, the teacher told you there's something that you shouldn't tell me. You know, if you create that relationship with your child, you know, that's the other thing. Like, just as it's wrong for activist types to try to coerce and force people to conform to their view of who they should be, it's not necessarily in the child's best interest for us to control and coerce them to become who we think they should be either. Really, there needs to be a little bit of trust, but this also depends on the age of the child, because you can't really trust your 4-year-old to come home and say, yes, they have shown me that there's no such thing as sex or gender, you know, or whatever. So
you should definitely tell your children what to think.
Well,
I don't know. You just say you shouldn't, because you
wrong.
definitely should. That's literally what everyone has done forever.
So that they can rebel against it. That's exactly what happens, is that you tell your kids, this is what we do in my house, this is what we think, and then your kids rebel against that, like as if it's the laws of gravity, because that's exactly the dynamic. So you want them to rebel against the teachers in this case, not against you. So I actually think that that's not the way you would want to go in this case, because then what would become attractive to the child is the rainbow hair colored teacher being like, you can be anything you want, including a man or whatever, like crazy things that they think is appropriate to teach a 6-year-old.
I don't know. Look, I mean, the final thing I'll say about this is people have been indoctrinating your children forever in schools. That's what the teachers do. They go to teach and they're like, I want to change the youth or whatever. The real problem is now there's such a rift in the actual culture where you have some people that are espousing what might be considered very left-wing ideological positions on gender and things like that in the school system, and people who are not into that. But the reality is we've been indoctrinated forever. That if you send your kid to a state school, what do you think? That it's not like in the past the teacher has just been like 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 3 is 5, and they're like robots that don't have their own opinions. They do. I mean, from every level. From the real problem, it's not this. Your kids have always been indoctrinated. It's that there's differing views on what is right and wrong now to such a level that people are freaking out about it. So that's the actual problem, which no one's going to be able to probably solve. That's why children, into the forest, survival knife, learn the ways of nature, and here is a tablet with the alphabet on it. Teach yourself to read while you're in nature. Done.
Well, yeah.
Moving on.
Like if you want to raise Rambo. So
Rambo can't be indoctrinated.
Well,
Rambo went off the grid. Rambo rebelled against the army itself. He's like, I am an army of one. And then the army was like, come on, Rambo. And then Rambo's like, okay, I'll go back to the army. So it wasn't a total success story, but John Rambo is a good figurehead to look for in terms of what you want your, maybe not so much because he also did have a psychotic break.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, go check our episode out on Rambo.
Yeah, will help you raise your children. Well,
What's the next question?
Also, no. I want to tie up the end of that because I think the point is important that the public schools have always basically been indoctrinating kids. The difference is that once upon a time, the culture was cohesive enough that you wanted your kid to be indoctrinated in the way that they were going to be indoctrinated. And so that fact is actually what would be crucial to solving the problem, because you'd be able to understand, okay, it's not necessarily that, there's something wrong now all of a sudden. It's that there's a shift in values. So maybe you can try to find a place where your child would be indoctrinated in the way that you want them to be indoctrinated in.
Which is the home, which is what I said before, which is you should indoctrinate your child in your belief and also throw them into the wilderness for wilderness training.
I advocate that.
I know you're taking this liberal position of like, let's just talk, Johnny, or whatever. Tell me about your feelings. Or no, tell them this is the way it is, and you will abide by these rules forever until you're 18 years old.
They would be the rainbow hair colored trans person in 5 years for sure with this.
That's not how the world has worked until like the last 50 years, I don't think. I mean, yeah, people rebel, whatever. Everyone's going to get a little rainbow hair every now and then. It's fine. Like, it's not too much of a problem. Again, I think I have pinpointed exactly the problem, which is it's a problem with the culture has divided into what's right and wrong. We haven't come to terms or decided yet what that is. So, of course, there can't be a consistent way to teach things. Though, granted, I think you're right. Maybe there is, though I still think there's always been this. Teachers kind of slipping in what they think is right about the wider world.
Yeah, but there's a difference, right? Because like there's now this real fervor.
The difference is Twitter, and now you see it.
No. The difference is like it's a difference between an individual thinking that, well, I want to teach kids to love nature. Okay, but there's a big difference between an ideological view that you should be actively inculcating other people's children with a set of views, like an actual ideology, right? Do you see what I mean here? Like they both have that same impetus to like, oh, I'm going to teach someone else's kids something that I think is important. That's not necessarily strictly 2 + 2 is 4, but there's a politicized approach to this newer form that I think is particularly pernicious because it's specifically designed to be that kind of an indoctrination. It's not the same as like you learn people's values throughout life as you go around. Like that's normal.
Let's boil this down to something more simplistic, because there's always been in schools someone who's like hardcore military, anti-communist people or whatever, and there's always been people like hippies in school. It's like, no, you should eat granola and whatever. That's all everyone's existed. The reason people are freaked out and pissed off is because it's about sex and gender. And when you take those subjects and you put them with kids, it scares and freaks people out even more than, oh, someone told me that, my history teacher told me that I should join the John Birch Society. Everyone just waves that off a little bit. It's like, oh, my history teacher told me that, some hippie thing. No one really, it's like, okay, no one really cares that much. It's because if we're talking about what we think we're talking about, which when people talk ideology in schools, they're either talking about the gender thing or to some degree race stuff. And I think even more so than the race stuff, it's gender stuff that is freaking everybody out.
Yeah, because then there's an impetus to act on it. The concern with a lot of parents is like that their kid is going to come home and be like, yeah, I want to have a surgical procedure, or I want to start taking hormones or something, which is harder to deal with than like a phase where the kid wants to have like rainbow hair and call you by your first name type of thing, which it's like that sucks, but you can kind of have faith that, well, let them go through this and they won't harm themselves that much. But in these
Tell your child rainbow hair does not work in the wilderness where you're trying to camouflage yourself against the communist invasion, which is coming by the Chinese. You want rainbow hair, you won't last a second with Rambo out in the wilderness. All right, Johnny? That's what all children are called. Moving on. Are we done?
Speaking of lasting more than a second in life, what's your opinion on longevity science that tries to extend the human lifespan? So that's our next question. Would you like to go first? Do you have a strong opinion, or should I?
Yeah, I have an opinion about it. I have an opinion about everything.
I love it. What? I think it's great. I do support extending the human lifespan. We've already extended the human lifespan. So I'd like to continue doing that. I don't want to die. I don't want the people that I love to die. I think that the reason that I really appreciate longevity science and these efforts to extend lifespan is that I think it would actually make humanity wiser. I think we'd be able to solve our problems more effectively if we had people that were 150 years old and still functional. Like, I think if people weren't like fizzling out and unable to function and in dire health by 80 and 90, if those people that had lived that long and seen so much could actually still contribute to society just as much as they did when they were in their 40s and 50s, we'd have a totally different society. Because the problem is that a lot of our issues come down to a lack of knowledge of history. a lot of issues that we have today, if you look back far enough, not that far, like 2 lifetimes, you'll find that we had the same problem, but no one has the memory of it. No one has the experience of it. So it's like abstracted or just gone from our toolbox, you know, in dealing with issues. So extending human lifespan could very well be the way that we make serious progress in society. Yeah, so I support it.
I support it also. I
You
mean,
seem
I think that
reluctant.
there's a downside to it and an upside, but I'm all for
Yeah.
the upside of it. The downside is, imagine you get it, like you take it to its farthest extent and like people can live for 2,000 years old. I mean,
Crazy.
do you really think you would get along well with Julius Caesar if he was giving advice? No, things changed so much over large periods of time that it would be like you were talking to someone that wasn't even hardly part of what you understand as humanity anymore.
But you'd have
So-
to assume that they would adapt. They would update.
Then what would
to-
be the use of their knowledge in your theory? Where
because
you
they
have,
would be in the present able to function, but they would also have experience. Imagine if you could fucking talk to Ben Franklin, dude. Like, he'd literally be like, what are you guys doing? This is the solution. We already dealt with this. We know exactly. Like, if
that's
he
not
was
what would
around,
happen though. People would stone him because they'd be like, "You're racist, Ben Franklin." That's what would happen. Because what I'm saying is, over huge amounts of time, people change so much that the ideas become so different. That's why Julius Caesar, if he were still alive, he would like take over. He would lead an army.
yeah, but you're
and take over the
negating the
things.
chance that they also would update. Like, they wouldn't stay
But
in
then
the
you
Stone
wouldn't have the.
Age.
But then what would be the use? Because it would just be Julius Caesar hanging out like on the internet with a podcast, and who cares?
That would be awesome.
You know,
That'd be fucking
you know what?
awesome.
I disagree with you on this one, and I agree it would be awesome too. And I want Julius Caesar to be alive today, and Benjamin
this
Franklin.
is a little bit
I'm
extreme,
just
but yeah.
throwing out. Well, but this other, I mean, like,
There's not gonna.
okay. So do you? I mean, what do you want me to do here? If you're 150, are you really bringing that much to the table? Like, is it really that different? It's not that different anyway. So then you're just kind of like
150 years is basically
quite a bit older.
exactly where people's knowledge falls off of the past.
Right, but there are books. Like, we
and do
know
people
what
fucking
people
read
thought.
them? No.
Right, but if we live in a world which no one can even read anymore, so what are they supposed to do? Go to storytelling hour with Benjamin Franklin?
No.
Benjamin Franklin podcast with Julius
That'd be
Caesar.
awesome.
Next week, on Benjamin Franklin's podcast, Julius
Crypto,
Caesar stopping
where-
by,
where's it
and we're going to
going?
talk about nutraceuticals. I mean,
No.
they'd end up having to talk about Bitcoin anyway.
Good.
because
they should.
everybody's.
I want to hear Jefferson's opinion on Bitcoin. That would be phenomenal.
I do too.
Instead of us just trying to come up with it. Look, the thing is that, like,
You got something in your eye there?
yeah, I do. I'm crying because of your ignorance. The thing is that there's a
I'm
difference.
endorsing it. I'm for it.
Silence. There's a difference between reading the books and having that like abstracted understanding of history and then having lived it, having the experience. It's completely different. You know, like, it's so obvious to me too. Like, as we look around, we've all fucking learned about dictatorships. We've all learned about that in school. And somehow when it's in front of us, we can't fucking see it. Because you know why? We're going to have to live it. That's what always happens with everything. It's like, you know, logically that if A, B, and C happen, you got to do D, or else F is going to happen. But when it's in our life, suddenly it's like, but this is different. But my self-interest has blinded me to the logical knowledge that I just had 5 minutes ago. And I can still tell you that logical knowledge, but when it's me, when it's the things that I care about, when it's this moment, suddenly that knowledge is completely abstracted and unable to be placed into context. That's the flaw that I see. It's not that we don't have the knowledge. We fucking do. Yeah, like, the books are there. We learned the shit, the history, all of this. Is that people can't apply it because they haven't lived it. There's something about living an experience that really makes you understand it on a level that I don't think is something a lot of people can do without the experience. And that's a lack
All right.
of ability. You know,
So just
like,
to be annoying, to take this to its further to conclusion, right? So let's say this happens, and then we get the knowledge of all the people that live longer, right? And they teach us not to fall into tyrannical governments or whatever, all the other stuff, right? So then we create a society where somehow we perfected society because we've been able to talk to people throughout history to deal with historical problems. And then people keep on living. Well, then there would be no problems anymore for anyone to have any knowledge of to pass on to anyone else. And so apparently we would just live in this world. So then what would be the point anymore? Because apparently
we would be in space already. We would have far greater problems, but they would be future problems. They wouldn't be.
Well, then there would be no use for the history people because the future problems.
It's an ever moving timeline forward, okay? So it's like Ben Franklin pulls a little bit of the past here to forward, but then there's someone later, right? That's now born in 50 years later, but then they bring the past forward a little more, and then someone that was born 50 years after then, and they bring the past forward a little more, and it keeps going like that, so that we always keep history transferring. There's always someone that was alive longer than not, okay? Because right now, like, it's crazy that, like...
But then that would solve eventually all of the problems if what you're saying is true.
No one would be from the future. No one would be from the future, so they wouldn't be able to anticipate
I am from the future.
Problems. Okay, that's enough. This AMA is done. We've solved past, present, and future problems. So if you enjoyed this, if you want to enjoy it more, join us on Patreon. Support the Silver Eye Society so that we can continue to solve past, present, and future problems. And you will get the private portion of this month's AMA. Only $2 a month for this kind of brilliance, this futurism. Where else are you going to get this? CNN? See you on the next episode.